In a world obsessed with perfection, curated images, billionaire weddings, designer gowns, and picture-perfect relationships, sometimes the most extraordinary love stories begin in the most ordinary of places. Not in a five-star resort, not on a red carpet, but in line for a bathroom. That's where a young man named Mark Zuckerberg met a girl named Priscilla Chan. He would go on to become one of the most powerful tech billionaires on the planet. She was the daughter of poor Vietnamese Chinese refugees, raised in a working-class town outside of Boston. And yet, against every stereotype, every social expectation, and every media criticism, their love endured. Not only endured, it became a story that quietly redefined what real love looks like in the modern world. Priscilla Chan was born in 1985 in Braintree, Massachusetts, into a family that had risked everything to escape war and depression. Her parents fled Vietnam by boat seeking refuge and a better life in America. They arrived with no English, no money, and no connections. What they did have was grit and a dream for their children to succeed. Growing up in Quincy, Massachusetts, Priscilla didn't have the privileges her classmates had. While other kids played after school, she was helping her grandparents translate utility bills. She learned early how to carry responsibility, not because anyone told her to, but because survival demanded it. Her parents worked non-stop, first in a small restaurant, later selling wholesale seafood, often too exhausted to guide her through the complexities of American education. But that didn't stop her. Priscilla excelled. She was known as the genius of her class, a robotics team standout, a varsity tennis captain. Still, none of it came easy. She was walking blind into a world her family had never entered before, the world of elite academia. When she got into Harvard, she became the first in her family to attend college, a milestone that wasn't just personal, but generational. And yet, even there, in one of the most prestigious institutions in the world, she often felt like she didn't belong. Surrounded by wealth, legacy students, and social polish, she questioned if her presence was a mistake. She considered transferring out. But a moment changed everything. While volunteering at a community health center, she met a young girl with broken front teeth, ignored by the system. That encounter lit a fire inside her. She realized she wasn't just at Harvard to get a degree. She was there to gain the power to fix things, to fight for those who had no voice. That moment solidified her dream, to become a pediatrician, a healer, a protector. It was sometime around then, at a college party, that she met a guy standing awkwardly in line for the bathroom. He was holding a beer and made a bizarre programming joke that only someone equally nerdy would get. She laughed. He noticed. They talked. There were no sparks flying, no slow-motion glances, just a quirky, intellectual connection. That guy was Mark Zuckerberg, the same Mark who would go on to create Facebook and change the way the world communicates. At the time, he was just another awkward computer science major with big ideas and bigger social discomforts. But something about Priscilla struck him: her warmth, her quick wit, her groundedness. She didn't try to impress him. She didn't need to. They started dating slowly, quietly, in the middle of their hectic student lives. While he stayed up building code and dreaming of a platform that would connect the world, she balanced organic chemistry labs, volunteer shifts, and late-night study sessions. Their dates weren't fancy. They ate dorm food, walked around campus, and studied together. It wasn't glamorous. But it was real. When Mark dropped out of Harvard to focus on Facebook, their relationship was tested. They came from different planets. He was entering a world of power, fame, and unimaginable wealth. She was on a path of service, science, and care. And yet, they stayed connected, grounded in values they both held close: hard work, humility, curiosity, and purpose. As Facebook exploded, so did media attention. And soon, the world began to notice Priscilla, not for her brilliance, her ambition, or her heart, but for how she looked. Western tabloids asked why someone so rich would marry someone so plain. Asian gossip sites criticized her appearance. Why her? They asked, again and again. But Mark never blinked. He stood by her with unwavering confidence. In one famous response, when asked why he didn't marry a more traditionally beautiful woman, Mark said, "I've met many conventionally beautiful women, but many of them had hearts like glass, fragile, high maintenance, and focused on superficial things. Priscilla is different. She's strong, wise, compassionate, and real. She's not a status symbol, she's my partner." In 2012, after nearly a decade of being together, Mark and Priscilla married in their backyard in Palo Alto. Only 50 guests attended. Most thought they were there to celebrate Priscilla's graduation from medical school. There were no paparazzi, no luxury brands. She wore a modest wedding dress. He gave her a sapphire ring he designed himself. Their honeymoon wasn't a glamorous escape. They went to Italy, and famously, ate at McDonald's. One media outlet mocked him for not tipping. But Priscilla didn't need grand gestures. She married the man, not the myth. And he, in turn, valued her not for how she looked in a dress, but for who she was when no one was watching. Their journey into parenthood wasn't easy. Priscilla suffered multiple miscarriages, silent heartbreaks they endured privately. When they finally welcomed their first daughter, Max, in 2015, Mark wrote an open letter to her, promising to dedicate his life to creating a better world, not just for her, but for all children. They later welcomed 2 more daughters, August and Aurelia. And, though the world was curious, Mark and Priscilla chose not to show their children's faces on social media. They believe in letting them have a real childhood, one free from the pressures of celebrity. At home, they are a normal family, at least as normal as a billionaire's household can be. Mark cooks. He reads bedtime stories. He teaches his girls how to code. Priscilla oversees bath time, homework, and hugs. They share chores, argue about dinner, and raise their kids like any other couple, grounded in love, respect, and intention. But their impact stretches far beyond family life. In 2015, the couple made one of the largest philanthropic pledges in history, committing to give away 99% of their Facebook shares, then worth over $45 billion, through their Zuckerberg initiative. Their focus? Education, healthcare, science, and equity. Priscilla leads much of the work behind the scenes, managing teams, shaping vision, and advocating for data-driven, compassionate solutions. She also founded a tuition-free private school that integrates early childhood education with prenatal healthcare and family support. In every way, she's not just the wife of Mark Zuckerberg. She is a visionary in her own right. In 2024, Mark commissioned a 7-foot silver green statue of Priscilla, unveiled privately but quickly picked up by media. Some called it excessive. Others called it romantic. For Mark, it was simple. He wanted to honor the woman who had been with him before the billions, before the boardrooms, before the fame. The one who saw his soul when no one else did. Today, after over 20 years together, they are still going strong. And they've quietly proven something radical. That real love, the kind that endures miscarriages, criticism, imbalance of power, media mockery, and unimaginable wealth, isn't built on status. It's built on shared values, mutual respect, deep friendship, and a commitment to grow together. Mark once said, "Marriage is like a pair of shoes. Only the one wearing them knows whether they fit." And maybe that's the truth we often forget. The world can judge, assume, speculate, or criticize, but only 2 people ever really know what their love is made of. For Mark and Priscilla, love was never about appearances. It was about substance. And in a world obsessed with filters, algorithms, and attention, perhaps the most revolutionary thing they've done is choose to be quietly, beautifully real. And if this story touched something in you, maybe it reminded you of the kind of love that matters, the kind that doesn't need to be loud to be powerful, then don't keep it to yourself. Share it. Because we need more stories like this in a world that sometimes forgets what really counts. If you made it this far, thank you.
In every generation, there are voices that do more than entertain. They heal, comfort, and stay with us long after the music ends. Karen Carpenter had one of those voices. Soft, haunting, and deeply human, her songs became the soundtrack of millions of lives. If you lived through the 1970s, you probably remember "Close to You," "We've Only Just Begun," or "Rainy Days and Mondays." Even if her name doesn't ring a bell immediately, chances are her voice has already touched your heart. To the world, she was the sweet, angelic face of the Carpenters, a symbol of clean-cut American pop perfection. But few knew the truth behind the soft melodies and flawless harmonies. Behind the gentle smile was a woman quietly falling apart. Karen Carpenter's life was a delicate balance between global fame and deep personal loneliness. Her voice gave comfort to millions, but her soul was often met with silence. In her pursuit of perfection, she slowly lost the very thing she longed for most: love, not from fans, but from those closest to her. Karen Carpenter was born into a home where love wasn't always given freely, and when it was, it rarely flowed in her direction. Born on March 2, 1950, in New Haven, Connecticut, she was the younger of two siblings. Her older brother Richard, born 4 years earlier, was the golden child from the start. To their mother, Agnes, Richard was not just the firstborn. He was the prodigy, the chosen one, the future star. Karen, meanwhile, was often left in the shadows, quietly watching her brother be praised and protected, while she absorbed the silences, the scoldings, and the subtle dismissals. Even as a little girl, Karen had a lively spirit. She loved being outdoors, playing baseball with the neighborhood kids, and was often the first one picked for a team. But that spark, so natural, so innocent, was quickly dimmed at home. Agnes didn't think baseball was ladylike, and Karen would often be reprimanded for not acting like a proper girl. She wasn't praised for her confidence or her energy. Instead, she was gently, but persistently, pushed to fit into a mold she never chose. Richard, on the other hand, was nurtured and encouraged. When he picked up an instrument, Agnes cheered. When he showed musical talent, the family uprooted their lives to move to California so he could have a shot at a professional career. Karen came along, of course, but not by choice. She left behind her childhood friends, her routines, her identity, because that's what younger siblings do in families where one child is clearly favored. Their father, Harold, had a quiet love for both of them. He was a man who spoke through action rather than words, sharing his vast record collection with the children, letting them explore music on their own terms. He didn't play favorites the way Agnes did. But sometimes, silence can be just as loud as favoritism. And in that silence, Karen learned how to disappear gracefully. This imbalance began to carve itself deep into Karen's identity. Children internalize what they're shown, and what Karen was shown day in and day out was that she was not the one to be celebrated. She was smart, she was funny, she was creative, but she was not the star. That title had already been taken. And so, without realizing it, she grew up with a quiet ache. The yearning to be seen, to be valued, to be chosen. Psychologists often speak about the long-term impact of favoritism in childhood. When one child is consistently overlooked, they tend to develop chronic self-doubt, even in adulthood. They become people pleasers, constantly seeking approval from others, especially authority figures. They may even sabotage their own success, because deep down, they don't believe they're worthy of it. For Karen, that manifested later as a need for perfection, for control, especially over her appearance, her performances, and eventually her weight. But that need didn't appear out of nowhere. It was born in part in a living room in suburban Connecticut, where one child was told, "You can be anything," and the other quietly wondered if she was ever enough. And that's one of the most painful truths about family. The wounds that shape us the most often come from those who never meant to hurt us. A mother doesn't always know the damage she's doing with her words. A sibling doesn't always see the shadow they cast. But for the one standing in that shadow, the darkness can feel endless. It started with a simple decision. A teenage girl trying to avoid gym class. Karen Carpenter wasn't chasing the spotlight. She wasn't dreaming of fame. She wasn't even planning to perform. When she joined the school band in Downey, California, it wasn't because she wanted to become a musician. It was because gym class made her uncomfortable, and music class offered an escape. And yet, that quiet act of self-preservation led her straight to the drums. The instrument felt natural, grounding, almost like a heartbeat she could control in a world where so much felt out of her hands. She didn't care for the attention. She preferred being in the background, keeping rhythm, holding everything together. Her brother Richard, on the other hand, was born for the spotlight. Talented, charismatic, and fiercely driven, he was already composing music, forming bands, and chasing record deals. In 1965, he created the Richard Carpenter Trio, inviting Karen to play drums. But her name? It didn't make it into the title. To some, it might have seemed like a small thing. But for Karen, it spoke volumes. She was good enough to be in the band, but not important enough to be recognized. That early dismissal echoed the same message she had grown up hearing: "You're not the star." But life, as it often does, had other plans. As the trio gained local attention, it became clear that Karen wasn't just a capable drummer. She could sing, and not just decently. Her voice was luminous, honest, piercing in its clarity, yet soft enough to carry sorrow without ever sounding heavy. It was a voice that didn't ask for attention. It commanded it. Richard, to his credit, recognized it. Eventually, he moved Karen to center stage, reluctantly at first, convincing her to step into the role of lead vocalist. She didn't fight it, but she didn't chase it either. Karen's humility was part of her magic. She sang like she was sharing a secret with you, not performing for millions. This unlikely transition, from background drummer to global sensation, reminds us of other artists who didn't start out wanting to be icons. Tina Turner, for example, spent years in the shadows of Ike Turner, known more as his backup singer and wife than a force of her own. But when her moment came, she didn't just shine. She exploded. Linda Ronstadt, often underestimated in the male-dominated rock world, carved out her own space with a voice so versatile it defied genre. Karen was different, but just as powerful. She didn't roar, she whispered. And in that whisper, millions heard their own heartbreaks, hopes, and quiet dreams. While Tina turned pain into fire, Karen turned silence into sound. What's most inspiring about Karen's rise is that it wasn't built on ego or ambition. It was built on talent, timing, and quiet strength. She didn't force the door open. She stood there, waiting, until someone finally realized she had the key. And once she stepped through, nothing was the same. Her voice became the signature sound of a generation. Delicate but unshakable. Even as fame wrapped itself around her, Karen never lost that sense of humility. She still saw herself as a drummer. She still felt most comfortable behind the kit. But the world had fallen in love with her voice, and it wasn't going to let her hide anymore. Karen Carpenter had the voice of an angel, the smile of a girl next door, and the stage presence that made her seem like she stepped out of an American dream. To the world, she was the perfect woman. Graceful, soft-spoken, wholesome. The press called her America's sweetheart. Fans adored her. TV specials, magazine covers, sold-out concerts. On the outside, everything shimmered. But behind the flawless image was a woman trapped in a role she didn't choose. Stardom, for Karen, became less of a blessing and more of a carefully polished cage. You see, the 1970s weren't just a time of musical innovation. They were also a time when female artists were held to impossible standards, not only in talent, but in appearance, behavior, and demeanor. A woman in the spotlight was expected to be effortlessly thin, endlessly graceful, and always smiling. And Karen fit that mold, until one day, the press decided she didn't. It began with a single article. A photograph had been taken of Karen performing "A Moment in Motion," caught mid-song. The writer, rather than commenting on her vocals or presence, made a cutting remark. Karen Carpenter looked heavier than usual. It was one sentence. But for Karen, it was a sentence that changed everything. The article didn't just hurt, it stuck. It clung to her thoughts, replayed in her mind like a broken record. Suddenly, every reflection in the mirror became a threat. Every compliment was questioned. Every pound gained a failure. It was the moment when perfection turned into pressure, and pressure became obsession. Karen started dieting. At first, it was innocent. Just a few pounds to feel more confident. But as the compliments rolled in, "You look great, Karen. You've never looked better." She kept going. She believed thinner meant better, and the culture around her reinforced that belief. At the time, thin equals beautiful wasn't just a passing trend. It was gospel. Magazines glorified skinny bodies. Actresses and singers were praised for their size before their skill. And the music industry, especially for women, was ruthless in its expectations. Karen, already so eager to be accepted, began chasing an ideal that kept slipping further and further away. What makes this even more heartbreaking is how invisible her pain was. To fans, she looked radiant. To the media, she was a style icon. But to Karen, she was never quite enough. She wore multiple layers of clothing to hide how much weight she'd lost. She used laxatives and later resorted to Epiac syrup to purge her food. All in the name of control. All in the hope of being perfect. And yet, what is perfection, really? It's a lie we tell ourselves. A mask we wear to survive in a world that rewards appearance over authenticity. Karen wasn't alone in that struggle. Even today, women and men fight the same silent battles. Social media platforms like Instagram are filled with filters and edited photos that create an illusion of perfection. We compare ourselves to airbrushed versions of reality, chasing bodies that don't exist, feeling inadequate in our own skin. The rise of wellness culture has made it easier to mask disordered eating under the label of clean living. And while the world has become more aware of body image issues, the pressure to look a certain way remains just as loud, if not louder. What happened to Karen Carpenter wasn't just a personal tragedy. It was a reflection of a much deeper cultural flaw, the belief that a woman's worth is tied to how small she can make herself. In Karen, she made herself too small, not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually. She dimmed her light to fit into a box that was never meant for someone as unique, as genuine, as tender-hearted as she was. She walked off stage to standing ovations, thunderous applause still echoing in the arena. Thousands had just cheered her name. She had smiled, bowed, and waved. And yet, just an hour later, Karen Carpenter would be alone in a hotel room, sitting by herself in silence, sipping a lukewarm cup of tea, her eyes quietly welling with tears no one would ever see. This was the other side of fame, the part that the world didn't want to believe. The part where a beautiful, successful, beloved star felt completely invisible. Karen had everything that most people dream of: platinum records, Grammy Awards, a fan base that spanned continents. Her voice had become the soundtrack of love, longing, and heartbreak for millions. And yet, in her own words, she often felt that no one truly knew her. The applause was deafening, but the loneliness was louder. Those close to Karen described her as someone with a deep emotional core, someone who carried the weight of the world in silence. After a show, while others celebrated, she'd often retreat to her room, not to rest, but to think, to feel, to ache. She was constantly surrounded by people, managers, producers, band members, fans, but rarely by connection. She longed for intimacy, not admiration. She wanted to be heard beyond her voice, seen beyond her image. There's a haunting irony in her story. The woman whose voice brought comfort to millions often had no one to comfort her. And this isn't unique to Karen. One of the biggest misconceptions we carry is that success equals happiness. That if someone is rich, talented, and adored, they must be living their dream. But the truth is, loneliness doesn't discriminate. It can creep into a crowded room. It can sit beside you on stage. It can follow you home, no matter how big the mansion. In fact, for many public figures, the more famous they become, the harder it is to find genuine connection. Are people being kind because they care, or because they want something? Are compliments real or rehearsed? Is this love or admiration in disguise? There are many kinds of heartbreak in life, but few cut as deep as the love that never came from the one person who was supposed to give it freely: your mother. For Karen Carpenter, the applause from millions couldn't silence one lingering ache: the quiet, constant yearning for her mother's approval. No matter how high the chart rankings climbed, how many awards she won, or how many voices called her name, there was always one voice she longed to hear, saying the words she'd waited for all her life: "I'm proud of you. I love you just as you are." But that voice rarely came from Agnes Carpenter. Agnes was a complex woman, strong, opinionated, and deeply invested in her son Richard's future. From early on, she poured her energy into Richard's musical talent, fiercely supportive and protective. Karen, meanwhile, became the child in the background, the good girl who didn't cause trouble, who followed the rules, who waited patiently for love that always seemed to land just out of reach. To outsiders, it may have seemed like a typical case of parental favoritism, but for Karen, it felt like rejection. Not loud or obvious, but persistent, subtle, wounding. And it stayed with her. That pain came into full view during a family therapy session in the early 1980s, arranged by Karen's eating disorder specialist, Dr. Stephen Levenkron. By that point, Karen's health was deteriorating, and Levenkron understood that physical healing wasn't enough. Emotional healing was crucial. So he invited Karen, her brother Richard, and Agnes to sit down together. Richard tried his best to be present. He expressed concern, love, and sadness at seeing his sister struggle. But when it was Agnes's turn to speak, she remained quiet, cold, unmoved. Karen, sitting across from her mother, waiting for some gesture of warmth, was met with silence. That moment, chronicled by many who knew her, was devastating. She wasn't asking for anything grand, just connection, just a little affection. But Agnes couldn't, or wouldn't, give it. And that, in many ways, was the final confirmation of what Karen had always feared. She would never be enough for her mother. Karen's story echoes that of other great artists who spent their lives chasing parental love. Judy Garland, for example, also lived under the shadow of a demanding mother who pushed her into fame and perfection at the cost of her mental health. Garland once said, "I was born at the age of 12 on an MGM lot." Like Karen, Judy was applauded by the world but rarely embraced at home. These women, gifted, sensitive, brilliant, spent their lives trying to earn love they should have been given freely. And so we must ask ourselves, how many of us live our lives waiting for someone's approval? How many dreams are chased not out of joy, but out of a desperate hope that maybe this time they'll notice? Parental wounds run deep, and when a child, no matter how grown, doesn't feel seen by the people who raised them, it leaves scars that success can't erase. Karen's longing for her mother's love wasn't a weakness. It was a basic human need, to be cherished by the one who gave you life. And yet, she kept singing, kept performing, kept giving the world the tenderness she rarely received herself. Maybe because she hoped that by healing others through her music, she might one day heal herself. For someone who gave so much love to the world, Karen Carpenter had always craved a simple dream, to be loved back. Not as a superstar, not as a voice, not as a performer, but as a woman, as Karen. By the late 1970s, she had achieved nearly everything an artist could hope for: fame, recognition, legacy. But in her personal life, she was still searching for connection, for stability, for a kind of love that would feel safe and unconditional. So when Thomas James Burris entered her life, a polished, charming real estate developer, he seemed like the answer she had been waiting for. But love, especially when we're vulnerable, doesn't always come dressed in truth. Sometimes it arrives wearing a costume. From the beginning, Burris knew how to say all the right things. He was older, confident, and projected a sense of worldly success. For a woman like Karen, tender, emotionally bruised, and still yearning for someone to choose her first, his attention felt like validation. It didn't matter that something felt rushed. It didn't matter that he was evasive about certain parts of his past. What mattered was that, for the first time in a long time, Karen felt chosen. Parental wounds run deep, and when a child, no matter how grown, doesn't feel seen by the people who raised them, it leaves scars that success can't erase. Karen's longing for her mother's love wasn't a weakness. It was a basic human need, to be cherished by the one who gave you life. And yet, she kept singing, kept performing, kept giving the world the tenderness she rarely received herself. Maybe because she hoped that by healing others through her music, she might one day heal herself. For someone who gave so much love to the world, Karen Carpenter had always craved a simple dream: to be loved back, not as a superstar, not as a voice, not as a performer, but as a woman, as Karen. By the late 1970s, she'd achieved nearly everything an artist could hope for: fame, recognition, legacy. But in her personal life, she was still searching for connection, for stability, for a kind of love that would feel safe and unconditional. So when Thomas James Burris entered her life, a polished, charming real estate developer, he seemed like the answer she had been waiting for. But love, especially when we're vulnerable, doesn't always come dressed in truth. Sometimes, it arrives wearing a costume. From the beginning, Burris knew how to say all the right things. He was older, confident, and projected a sense of worldly success. For a woman like Karen, tender, emotionally bruised, and still yearning for someone to choose her first, his attention felt like validation. It didn't matter that something felt rushed. It didn't matter that he was evasive about certain parts of his past. What mattered was that, for the first time in a long time, Karen felt chosen. Why does this happen? Why do we, especially in moments of emotional weakness, make choices that lead us further into pain? The answer lies in human nature. When we're starved of love, we will often settle for its illusion. We convince ourselves that being chosen, even wrongly, is better than being alone. We mistake affection for love, attention for safety. Karen's marriage was not a failure of intelligence. It was a cry for connection. And like so many others, she learned the hard way that choosing a partner when you're hurting often leads to deeper wounds. This chapter of her life reminds us of a painful but powerful truth. Love isn't just about being wanted. It's about being respected, seen, honored. And before we can expect that from someone else, we have to first know what we're worth. Karen's worth was never in question to her fans, but to herself. It had been chipped away year after year by rejection, pressure, and silence. And when that worth is fragile, it's easy to let someone else define your value. But she would eventually break free. She filed for divorce, trying to reclaim her life. It was a step, small but brave, a turning point. From the outside, Karen Carpenter was the embodiment of grace and control. Her voice was steady, her smile constant, her image immaculate. But beneath the surface, a silent war was being waged, a war not against critics or industry pressures, but against her own body. In the 1970s and early 1980s, anorexia nervosa was barely understood. It wasn't in the headlines, it wasn't taught in schools. It wasn't something people talked about at the dinner table. It was invisible, misinterpreted as vanity, dismissed as a phase, or worse, applauded as discipline. And that's what made it so dangerous. Karen didn't wake up one day and decide to be sick. Like many who suffer from eating disorders, her struggle began with something seemingly harmless, a desire to lose just a little weight. After reading a comment in the media that described her as looking heavy, she started dieting, and the world applauded. "You look amazing. So much slimmer. Keep it up." But for someone who had grown up feeling unseen, unchosen, and out of control, those compliments weren't just kind words. They were proof of worth. So she kept going, 1 pound at a time, one compliment at a time, until it stopped being a choice and became a compulsion. Karen began using laxatives, taking up to 90 pills a night. Why? Because laxatives made her feel lighter, even though they offered no real weight loss, only the illusion of control. She also began using Epiac syrup, a medication designed to induce vomiting in cases of poisoning. In her mind, it was a way to undo the guilt of eating. What she didn't know, what very few people understood back then, was that long-term use of Epiac can destroy the heart's muscle tissue. And that's exactly what it did. Her heart, already weakened by years of malnourishment, simply couldn't take it anymore. This wasn't vanity. This wasn't attention-seeking. This was a mental illness with devastating physical consequences. Today, we know more. We have names, treatments, support groups. But the culture that feeds disorders like anorexia still lingers. It's in every airbrushed photo, every before and after post, every what I eat in a day video that glorifies restriction as achievement. Karen's story mirrors those of countless others, both famous and unseen. Princess Diana also battled bulimia, confessing it was a way to cope with emotional pain. Actress Lily Collins has spoken publicly about her fight with anorexia, describing it as a voice in your head that tells you you're never enough. These are not stories of weakness. They are stories of pain being misread, of worth being tied to appearance. And maybe that's the hardest part about eating disorders. They're invisible until they're not, until the weight loss is so extreme that people finally notice, until the body begins to shut down, until it's too late. It was a quiet Friday morning, February 4th, 1983. Karen Carpenter had woken up early at her parents' home in Downey, California. The sun hadn't fully risen, and the house was still hushed in a sleepy calm. Karen moved softly through the hallway, perhaps planning to make breakfast, maybe get ready for the day. There was a small spark of routine in her step, a faint flicker of normalcy. After months of treatment in New York and slow, painful recovery, she had just returned home with cautious hope. Her weight had gone up slightly. She had been trying. She was preparing to sign the divorce papers from Thomas Burris and take control of her life again. To those around her, it looked like she was turning a corner. But the damage was already done. Years of self-starvation, emotional trauma, and misuse of medications had left her heart weak, irreversibly so. And on that quiet morning, just as she was beginning to reclaim her life, Karen collapsed. Her mother, Agnes, found her lying on the floor of her bedroom closet, unconscious and unresponsive. Panic ensued. Paramedics were called. She was rushed to Downey Community Hospital, but it was too late. Karen Carpenter, one of the most beloved voices of her generation, was pronounced dead. She was only 32 years old. The news stunned the world. But it devastated her brother Richard in a way few could comprehend. Richard had been more than a sibling. He was her musical partner, her collaborator, her confidant. And yet, even with all their closeness, he hadn't fully seen the depth of her suffering. He later admitted that while he noticed the weight loss, he didn't understand the severity of her condition until it spiraled too far. The guilt, the heartbreak, the what-ifs haunted him for years. Agnes's reaction, by contrast, was more complicated. Those who knew her described her as stoic, withholding emotion even in moments of great tragedy. Perhaps it was her way of coping. Perhaps she didn't know how to show vulnerability. But to Karen, who had spent her entire life trying to win her mother's love, this emotional distance had always been the most painful silence of all. Doctors later confirmed that Karen died of cardiac arrest, caused by complications from anorexia nervosa, specifically from the strain of her body trying to rapidly adjust to intravenous feeding after years of malnutrition. Her heart, already fragile, simply gave out. And the question that still echoes, decades later, is this: what if someone had truly listened sooner? What if the people around her had not just seen the shrinking body, but heard the shrinking spirit? What if someone had told her, not as a fan or a family member or a manager, but as a friend, "You are enough, as you are, right now"? So many of us walk past people every day who are quietly breaking. We compliment their appearances, applaud their achievements, but forget to ask how they're really doing. Karen's story is a reminder that sometimes the most successful, the most beautiful, the most admired people are the ones in the most pain. She didn't need a stand-in ovation. She needed a hug. She didn't need another #1 hit. She needed someone to say, "You don't have to be perfect to be loved." Karen Carpenter's final days weren't defined by her illness, but by her resilience, her continued effort to heal, her determination to find herself beneath the image. And that's something worth remembering. Though her life ended far too soon, Karen Carpenter's voice never faded. It became eternal. In a world that often forgets its stars once the spotlight dims, Karen's music continued to shine, quietly yet powerfully, like a candle that refuses to go out. In 1996, 13 years after her passing, the world finally heard the album Karen had recorded in secret, a solo project she had worked on in 1979, during a time when she was desperately trying to break free from the image others had built for her. This album was more than just a collection of songs. It was her voice, not just vocally, but emotionally, artistically, personally. It was Karen without compromise, singing in a style that was bolder, more modern, and far more reflective of her inner self than anything she had recorded before. She wasn't just the melancholy voice of love ballads anymore. She was exploring new rhythms, new energy, new emotion. But back then, her solo work wasn't welcomed. A&M Records shelved the project. Richard and others in her circle reportedly didn't support the direction she had taken. It was deemed too different, too risky, too far from the Carpenters brand. And so, the album was silenced, just like Karen had been so many times in life. Only after her death was the world ready to listen. And when they did, they heard something remarkable. A woman reaching for freedom. A soul declaring independence. A voice that had always sounded soft, now rising with conviction. So what made Karen's music so timeless, so hauntingly unforgettable? It wasn't just the clarity of her tone or the precision of her phrasing. It was the emotional honesty she carried in every note. While other singers of her era were belting and dazzling with power, Karen whispered truths. She didn't overpower a song. She invited you in. And that intimacy is what still breaks hearts today. Her voice didn't perform to you. It spoke with you. It met you in your joy and in your sorrow, in your longing and your loneliness. Whether it was Rainy Days and Mondays, Superstar, or For All We Know, her music was a mirror, reflecting the quiet ache inside us all. That's the magic of true artistry. Long after the artist is gone, their voice continues to whisper through time. You can put on a Karen Carpenter song today, close your eyes, and feel like she's right there, sitting beside you, singing just for you. And maybe that's what Karen always wanted. Not the fame, not the stage, not the perfect image, but to connect, to make someone feel less alone, to offer, through melody, what she longed for most in life: comfort, understanding, love. In the end, she didn't just leave behind a discography, she left behind a language of emotion. A way for people who couldn't find the words to say, "This is how I feel," to press play and let her say it for them. Karen's true legacy isn't just that she had one of the greatest voices of all time. It's that she used that voice to heal, to soothe, to connect. And she still does. Decades later, in every living room, car ride, and pair of headphones where her music plays. Karen Carpenter's life was a song, soft, delicate, filled with beauty and sorrow in equal measure. Though her time on Earth was short, her voice has never left us. It still plays in quiet corners, in moments of stillness, in memories that refuse to fade. But if we listen closely, her story also becomes a mirror, reflecting the lessons we often overlook in the noise of modern life. So, if this story touched you, let it remind you to be kinder, to yourself, to those around you, and to the voices we sometimes forget to hear. What part of Karen's journey resonated most with you? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Your voice matters, just like hers did. If you found value in this story, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. It helps us bring more untold stories like Karen's to life, and maybe, just maybe, help someone feel a little less alone. Until next time, stay kind, stay human, and never stop listening.